3 million years ago, a small creature stood upright on a sun-baked African plain, looked out across a world it did not yet understand, and took the very first step in the longest journey in human history. Not a journey measured in miles, not a journey measured in years, but a journey measured in the slow, grinding, magnificent turning of geological time itself. And that journey, that impossible, breathtaking, humbling journey, is the story we are going to tell tonight. Tonight we are going back, not to ancient Rome or medieval castles, not to pyramids or silk roads or the courts of emperors. Tonight we are going back much, much further than any of that. We are going back to the very beginning of us, to the age of stone and fire and silence, to the time before writing, before farming, before cities and laws and kings, to the Paleolithic era, the Old Stone Age, a period stretching from approximately 3.3 million years ago all the way to around 12,000 years ago. A period so vast it makes all of recorded history look like a single heartbeat. We will travel across continents, through ice ages, through forests and deserts and frozen tundras. We will meet our ancestors, strange and familiar at the same time, and we will follow them on the most incredible survival story ever told. This is not just a history lesson. This is the story of how you came to exist, every breath you take tonight, every dream you will have, every memory stored inside your mind. All of it traces its roots back to those first human hands that reached out in the darkness and struck two stones together to make a spark. The choices made by people who lived hundreds of thousands of years ago shaped your brain, your instincts, your capacity for love and fear and wonder. When you feel a deep, inexplicable peace sitting beside a campfire, that is them. That is 3 million years of memory, alive in your blood. This story is as personal as it gets. If you are enjoying this content and want more journeys like this one, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you a brand new story every single day. Epic historical narratives, sleep stories, deep dives into the ancient world. This is the most comprehensive collection of long-form historical storytelling you will find anywhere. One tap, 1 second, and you will never miss another journey. So please, before we begin, hit that subscribe button. It genuinely means everything to us. Now, settle in. Pull your blanket a little closer. Let your body sink gently into wherever you are right now. Whether you are lying in bed with headphones on or drifting somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, this is the perfect moment to let go of the day and travel somewhere ancient and beautiful. This is going to be a long and magnificent journey, and you are in absolutely no rush. Let your breathing slow. Let the world outside grow quiet. Tonight, we go all the way back to the beginning. Let's begin. Now imagine yourself standing on the African continent approximately 3.5 million years ago. Not the Africa you might picture from photographs or documentaries. Lush savannas, dramatic sunsets, vast herds of wildebeest. The landscape around you is both familiar and utterly alien. The sky above is the same blue it has always been, stretched wide and endless over an equatorial plain that shimmers with heat. But the world is quieter than you could possibly imagine. There are no roads, no distant sounds of traffic or machines, no aircraft overhead. Just wind, just grass bending, just the occasional call of a bird or the low rumble of some large animal moving through the brush in the middle distance. The silence is not empty. It is full. It is ancient. And somewhere out there, barely visible against the scrubland, a small group of creatures move slowly, cautiously across the open ground. These creatures are not quite human, not yet, but they are something extraordinary. They walk upright. This is new in the world. This is remarkable. On two legs, freeing their hands for tasks that no creature before them had ever imagined. Their brains are roughly 1/3 the size of yours. Their faces are wide, their brows heavy, their jaws powerful. They stand perhaps 4 feet tall, and they live in a world of constant, exhausting alertness. Every sound might be a predator, or every shadow might mean death. Saber-toothed cats roam these plains. Giant hyenas stalk the same waterholes. And these small, upright creatures, members of the genus Australopithecus, are not at the top of the food chain, not yet. But they are something that has never existed before. They are the beginning. Scientists have found their footprints, you know. In 1976, at a site called Laetoli in what is now Tanzania, the researchers discovered a trail of fossilized footprints pressed into volcanic ash that had hardened like concrete nearly 3.6 million years ago. 2 individuals, perhaps a third, had walked side by side across that ash, and their footprints had been perfectly preserved by the quirk of a brief rainfall, followed by a scorching sun. When those prints were uncovered, scientists stared in astonishment. They were unmistakably bipedal, unmistakably upright. The arch of the foot, yet the push-off from the big toe, all of it looked hauntingly familiar. It looked, in fact, like a walk you or I might take across a beach. And for a long, extraordinary moment, those ancient footprints and our modern ones reached across millions of years and touched. What drove these early ancestors to stand upright is one of the great questions of paleoanthropology, and the answer is beautifully complex. The African climate was changing. Forests were contracting, giving way to open grasslands called savannas. And on the open savanna, being able to see above the grass, to spot predators and prey from a distance, was a survival advantage of immeasurable value. Standing up also freed the hands, and free hands meant the ability to carry food, to hold infants, to manipulate objects. Evolution does not plan ahead. It does not look at a creature and decide what it should become. It simply favors whatever works. And upright walking worked, so it spread. But generation after generation, the creatures who walked upright survived just a little more often, passed their genes along just a little more reliably, and slowly, over hundreds of thousands of years, bipedalism became the defining trait of our lineage. But there is something else that happened in those early years. Something perhaps even more important than standing up. These early ancestors began to make tools. Simple at first, shockingly simple really, but tools nonetheless. The oldest known stone tools were discovered at a site called Lomekwi in Kenya, dated to approximately 3.3 million years ago. They are crude things, these tools. Large, heavy flakes of rock knocked deliberately from a core stone. No elegance, no refinement. But they were intentional. Somebody picked up a rock. Somebody examined another rock. Somebody struck one against the other with a specific goal in mind. That moment, that first deliberate, a purposeful shaping of stone, is perhaps the most important moment in all of human prehistory. Because it means something new had entered the world. It means that something was thinking about tomorrow. Picture this. You are standing on the edge of a dry riverbed in East Africa, roughly 2 million years ago. The morning is cool and the sky is pale with early light. Around you, the scrub is alive with insects and the distant calls of birds. And down in the riverbed, it crouched among the rounded stones left by the last rainy season's floods. A figure is working. Working with a kind of focused, patient intensity that feels startlingly modern. This creature, smaller than us, with longer arms and a more prominent brow, is holding a round river cobble in one hand and striking it methodically against a larger flat stone. Each blow is deliberate. Each strike removes a flake of rock with a sharp conchoidal fracture. And after perhaps 100 strikes, what remains in the figure's hand is a primitive but effective chopping tool. Heavy, sharp-edged, capable of cracking open bone to get at the rich marrow inside. This is Homo habilis, which means literally handy man. The name was given by the great paleoanthropologist Louis Leakey when he and his team discovered fossils of this species in Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania in the early 1960s. It was a moment that changed everything we thought we knew about human origins. Homo habilis had a brain noticeably larger than Australopithecus, around 600 cubic centimeters compared to our own 1,400. And along with those fossils, Leakey found stone tools of a type now called Oldowan technology. Named after Olduvai Gorge itself, these Oldowan tools are the earliest clear evidence of systematic stone tool manufacture. They represent, in Leakey's phrase, the dawn of the toolmaker. They represent the moment our ancestors stopped simply using what the world provided and started shaping the world to fit their needs. Did you know that Homo habilis may not have been a hunter at all in the modern sense? For many decades, the popular image of early humans was of brave, bold hunters chasing down large game across the savanna. But the evidence increasingly suggests that habilis was primarily a scavenger, a clever opportunistic creature who watched from a safe distance as lions and leopards made their kills, and then waited for the predators to retreat before rushing in to claim whatever was left. And what habilis was particularly after was the bones. After lions and vultures had stripped the meat, the bones remained. And inside those bones was something extraordinary. Marrow. Rich, calorie-dense, fatty marrow that no other creature could access. Except habilis, with a stone tool, could crack those bones open. In a world where calories were everything, this was not scavenging in any degrading sense. No, this was genius. This was innovation. This was the beginning of a very particular kind of cleverness that would define our lineage forever. The world of Homo habilis was a world of constant uncertainty. Nothing about life was guaranteed. The rains came and went unpredictably. Waterholes dried up. Herds of game shifted their ranges. The same landscape that provided food for a season might be barren the next. And in this world of uncertainty, yes, the creatures that survived were not necessarily the strongest or the fastest. They were the most adaptable, the most creative, the ones who could look at a problem, a bone that needed cracking, a piece of tuber buried in hard ground, a predator blocking the path to water, and think of a solution that had never been tried before. Evolution was not sculpting muscle or fang. It was sculpting mind. It was sculpting that miraculous, restless, endlessly resourceful thing we call human intelligence. There is a profound silence at the heart of this early world that I want you to sit with for a moment. Homo habilis left behind stone tools and bones and fragmentary fossils. But they left behind nothing that speaks in words. No cave art, no burial sites, no evidence of ceremony or ritual. The inner world of habilis, if there was an inner world in any meaningful sense, is almost entirely hidden from us. Did they dream? Did they grieve? Did they recognize themselves in still water? Oh, we do not know. And yet, they were our ancestors. The blood that ran in their veins runs, in some unbroken chain of inheritance, in yours tonight. There is something deeply moving in that thought, that these quiet, capable, almost unknowable creatures are part of us, and we are part of them. And the distance between their world and ours is both immeasurably vast and surprisingly thin. Now imagine yourself in a world transformed, not millions of years, but hundreds of thousands of years have passed since Habilis crouched in that riverbed. The year, if we can call it that, is approximately 1.8 million years ago, and on the plains of East Africa, a new kind of human has emerged. Taller, stronger, with a brain significantly larger than Habilis. Long-legged, built for distance, built for endurance. A creature who could walk and walk and walk for hours and days and weeks across open terrain. This is Homo erectus, and everything about its anatomy says one word: go. Homo erectus was the great traveler of the Paleolithic world. It was the first of our ancestors to leave Africa in significant numbers, spreading across the Middle East into Asia, eventually reaching as far as Java and the island of Flores, in what is now Indonesia. The fossils of Homo erectus have been found on 3 continents. They have been found in Georgia, in the Caucasus Mountains, dating to roughly 1.85 million years ago, the oldest hominid fossils ever found outside Africa. They have been found in China, at a site called Zhukudian near Beijing, where decades of excavation uncovered the remains of more than 40 individuals who lived there between roughly 780,000 and 400,000 years ago. These Peking man fossils, as they came to be called, revealed a creature living in caves, using fire and processing animal bones on a scale that spoke of real, organized social behavior. Homo erectus was not wandering. Homo erectus was settling in, making itself at home in a world it was actively claiming. And then there is fire. Oh, the fire. This is the moment, the discovery, or perhaps the harnessing of fire, that changes everything in ways we can barely overstate. The evidence for controlled fire use by Homo erectus dates back at least 1 million years, perhaps longer. At sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa and Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, researchers have found charred bone, burned plant material, and ash deposits that speak unmistakably of fire deliberately made and maintained. Think about what fire meant. Think about what fire did to the world of these early people. Fire meant warmth on cold nights, safety from predators who feared its light, a gathering point around which a social group could coalesce at the end of a long day. But fire meant something even more transformative than any of that. Fire meant cooked food. The primatologist and anthropologist Richard Wrangham has argued, compellingly and controversially, that it was the cooking of food that drove the most dramatic expansion of the human brain. Raw food requires enormous amounts of digestive energy and time. Cooking breaks down starches and proteins before they even enter the body, releasing far more calories from the same food, requiring far less gut processing. A creature who ate cooked food could have a smaller gut and a larger brain. And that is exactly what we see in the fossil record as we move from Homo habilis through Homo erectus and beyond. The gut shrank. The brain expanded. The face flattened. The teeth grew smaller as the mechanical demands of raw chewing were removed. We are, in the most literal biological sense, creatures shaped by cooking. We are the species that fire made. Let us imagine now what an evening around that first fire must have felt like. The darkness of the Paleolithic world was absolute. Not the relative darkness of our street-lit, screen-lit nights, but true, complete, engulfing darkness, filled with sounds that meant danger. And in the middle of that darkness, fire. A small circle of orange light, warm against the faces gathered around it, holding the night at bay, and around that fire, a community. A group of individuals who depended on each other for survival in the most immediate and visceral way imaginable. There is research suggesting that fire and the extended evening hours it created drove the development of language, of storytelling, of social bonding. Before fire, the day ended at sunset, and everyone simply slept. After fire, there were evenings, hours of warmth and relative safety in which minds could be idle, in which stories could be told, and in which the social fabric of the group could be woven tighter with every passing night. But nobody yet, not in all the vast span of Homo erectus's time on Earth, could have imagined what would happen next, because somewhere in Africa, perhaps 300,000 years ago, something new was stirring. Something that would change the world so completely that every human being alive today carries its genetic signature. A new kind of human was emerging, and the world would never be the same. Now we come to one of the most fascinating, most poignant, most misunderstood stories in all of human prehistory. And now we're arriving at the part of the story that even many history enthusiasts don't fully appreciate, because this next chapter is not about us, exactly. It is about them. Our cousins, our neighbors across time, the ones who walked the same lands, breathed the same air, and in the end, vanished. This is the story of the Neanderthals. Picture yourself in Ice Age Europe, roughly 100,000 years ago. The climate is cold, not just cold by our standards, but genuinely glacial. With ice sheets covering much of northern Europe and the landscape to the south transformed into a frigid steppe tundra, swept by fierce Arctic winds. And moving through this landscape, bundled against the cold in animal hides that they have carefully scraped and prepared with their own hands, a group of Neanderthals makes its way along a valley floor, tracking a herd of woolly mammoth. They are not the brutish, club-wielding cavemen of old cartoons. These are sophisticated hunters, skilled craftspeople, and, as we have increasingly come to understand, deeply feeling beings. The Neanderthal who strides at the head of this group is powerfully built, barrel-chested against the cold, with legs and arms densely muscled from a lifetime of hard physical labor. His face is broad and heavy-browed, his nose enormous. An adaptation, researchers believe, for warming and humidifying cold, dry Arctic air before it reaches the delicate tissues of the lungs. He is not us, but he is kin. Neanderthals lived in Europe and Western Asia for perhaps 400,000 years, an almost incomprehensible span of time. They successfully navigated multiple glacial cycles, adapted to environments ranging from the wooded hills of Spain to the frigid valleys of Siberia. They were, by any reasonable measure, enormously successful human beings. Their brains were, on average, actually slightly larger than ours. Their tools, the Mosterian technology associated with Neanderthals, were sophisticated and varied, including carefully shaped scrapers, points, and hand axes produced through a complex knapping technique called levallois, which required planning and skill of a very high order. They buried their dead, which tells us something extraordinary about their inner world. To bury the dead is to acknowledge death. To acknowledge death is to understand that existence is finite. It is one of the very first signs of what we might call a symbolic mind, a mind that reaches beyond the immediate present into questions of meaning and loss, and perhaps something beyond. Did you know that Neanderthals used pigments? That at sites in Spain dating to more than 65,000 years ago, long before modern humans arrived in Europe, researchers have found shells coated in ochre and perforated for use as pendants? These are not the tools of a purely practical creature. These are the ornaments of someone who cared about how they appeared, who perhaps had concepts of beauty and self-expression. There is evidence at some sites of eagle feathers and talons being collected and prepared, possibly as decorative items. Flowers may have been placed in Neanderthal graves, though this evidence is debated with great passion among paleoanthropologists. But the question itself is breathtaking. As did a Neanderthal grieve at a graveside, arrange flowers in the cold earth, and feel something that we would recognize as sorrow? The evidence increasingly says, perhaps yes. The Neanderthal world was a world of immense physical challenge and, it seems, genuine emotional depth. They lived in extended family groups, cared for their injured and elderly. We know this because fossils show individuals who survived severe injuries for months or years, which would have been impossible without sustained social care, and communicated, almost certainly, with something approaching language. Not perhaps the fully syntactic, grammatically complex language we use tonight, but sounds with meaning. Calls that conveyed not just warning, but nuance, the beginning of the word. And then, slowly at first, then with gathering speed, the modern humans arrived. And everything changed. And now we've arrived at what might be the most important part of this journey. We have traveled billions of years through geological time, millions of years through the evolution of our lineage. And now we are approaching the moment that is truly ours. The emergence of Homo sapiens, us, anatomically modern humans, is dated to roughly 300,000 years ago in Africa. Though the story of how and where modern humans first appeared is far more complex and far more beautiful than a single date and place could ever capture. Imagine standing in the highlands of Morocco, at a site that would one day be called Jebel Irhoud. The year is approximately 300,000 BCE. The sky is vast and clear. The landscape around you is a mosaic of grassland and woodland, alive with game. And here, living in and around a shallow cave, are people who would be recognizable to you in a way that habilis or even erectus was not. Their faces are more rounded, their brows less heavy. Their bodies are tall and lean. Their eyes, if you could look into them across the abyss of time, might show you something startlingly familiar. Curiosity, recognition, the spark of a fully modern mind. The story of Homo sapiens in Africa is a story of extraordinary diversity and creativity. For hundreds of thousands of years, modern humans lived across the vast African continent, not as a single population, but as many scattered groups, each shaped by their own local environment, each developing its own innovations. In southern Africa, at sites like Blombos Cave and Pinnacle Point, researchers have found evidence of behaviors that seem unmistakably modern. The use of ochre pigment for decoration or symbolic purposes dating back 100,000 years or more. Plus, the production of complex composite tools that required the planning and preparation of multiple different materials, the exploitation of marine resources, including shellfish and fish, in ways that speak of systematic, forward-looking behavior. At Blombos Cave, small pieces of ochre were found engraved with geometric patterns, deliberate, non-functional marks, abstract marks. The very first art in the world, made by human hands that wanted to make something beautiful or meaningful, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And here is something you may not have known. The human genetic evidence tells us that the population of Homo sapiens in Africa underwent what geneticists call a severe bottleneck at some point between 800,000 and 900,000 years ago. An event so catastrophic that the entire global population of our ancestors was reduced to perhaps as few as 1,280 breeding individuals. Think about that. Now, the entire population of the ancestors of every human being alive today, all 8 billion of us, was at one point no larger than a small village. Whatever caused this near extinction, climate change, disease, volcanic eruption, we cannot know for certain. But our entire species nearly vanished before it had truly begun. And the fact that it did not, the fact that those 1,280 survivors clung on and rebuilt and eventually spread across the entire Earth, thus is perhaps the most remarkable survival story in the history of life on this planet. If you've been on this journey with me and you're enjoying it, this would be a wonderful moment to pause and give the video a like. It takes just a second. but it makes an enormous difference in helping more people find these stories. And if you have a thought, a question, something this story is making you feel, write it in the comments below. I read every single comment, and they genuinely shape the direction of future videos. Now let's keep going, because the next part of this story is where things become truly extraordinary. Now picture this. You are standing on the edge of a continent. To your south, behind you, is Africa. Your home, the cradle of your species, the place where your lineage has lived and evolved for hundreds of thousands of years. To your north, across a narrow land bridge that connects the continents at what is now the Sinai Peninsula and the Levant, is a world you have never seen. A world of different landscapes, different animals, different skies, and something, some restless impulse, some hunger, some need to see what is beyond the horizon, is pulling you forward. Homo sapiens began leaving Africa in significant numbers approximately 60,000 to 70,000 years ago. That's in what geneticists and archaeologists call the out-of-Africa migration. This was not a single event, not a single group of people packing up and marching north. It was a slow, gradual, multi-generational spreading, people following game into new territories, settling for a generation or two, then continuing on. Children growing up at the leading edge of the expansion, knowing no other home, pressing further into the unknown. And generation after generation, over thousands of years, whilst this inexorable spreading carried the descendants of those African ancestors across the entire world. Within perhaps 20,000 years of leaving Africa, modern humans had reached Australia. Within perhaps 40,000 years, they had populated Europe, suppressing or absorbing the Neanderthals who had lived there for 400,000 years. Within perhaps 15,000 to 30,000 years after crossing into Asia, and the first humans crossed the land bridge that then connected Siberia to Alaska and began the colonization of the Americas. And so, piece by piece, continent by continent, valley by valley, and river by river, our ancestors claimed the entire Earth. The routes these early migrants took are written not in stone or clay, but in our own DNA. Every human being alive today carries genetic signatures of this migration in their cells. Our population geneticists can read these signatures the way a historian reads ancient documents, tracing branching points, bottlenecks, admixtures, the moments when populations diverged or rejoined. We know that a small founding population left Africa and gave rise to all non-African humans today. We know that this population subsequently split, with one branch moving west toward Europe and another east toward Asia and beyond. We know that somewhere in the Middle East, our early modern humans encountered Neanderthals. And we know what happened, because every non-African person alive today carries, in their genome, approximately 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. They met. They lived alongside each other. They had children together. The boundary between us and them was not as absolute as we once thought. The migration into Europe, beginning roughly 45,000 years ago, produced one of the most spectacular flowerings of human culture in all of prehistory. So the period archaeologists call the Upper Paleolithic saw an explosion of art, music, complex tool technology, and symbolic behavior that is genuinely astonishing in its richness. These are the people who painted the caves of Lascaux and Chauvet and Altamira. These are the people who carved the Lion Man of the Hohensteinstadel, a remarkable figurine combining the body of a human with the head of a cave lion, created approximately 40,000 years ago, which required not only great skill, but a truly extraordinary capacity for symbolic, abstract thought. These are the people who made flutes from bird bone and mammoth ivory and played music in the deep chambers of caves while firelight danced on the walls. This was not bare survival. This was civilization of a kind. Now I want to take you somewhere very specific. Somewhere that, if you could visit it in person, would stop you in your tracks and fill your eyes with tears. And I want to take you to the Lascaux cave complex in the Dordogne region of southwestern France, in the year approximately 17,000 BCE. The world outside is cold. This is the height of the last glacial maximum, and ice sheets are grinding across northern Europe. But here in the valleys of the Dordogne, the climate is milder, and a group of people, let us call them by the name archaeologists give to their culture, the Magdalenians, have made their home. One evening, a young woman takes a small oil lamp, a flat stone hollowed to hold animal fat with a twisted plant fiber wick, and descends into a cave in the limestone hillside. She has been here before. She knows the passages. She turns left at the first junction, moves through a low crawl that opens into a high, cathedral-like chamber, and holds her lamp up. And in the flickering amber light, the walls come alive. Horses, dozens of horses, painted with breathtaking naturalism. Yes, their bodies graceful and powerful, their manes flowing, their eyes somehow alive. Aurochs, the wild ancestor of domestic cattle, enormous and magnificent. Deer and bison and rhinoceros and bears. But also, and this is the thing that will make you gasp, a bull whose horns are shown twisted in perspective, showing two sides at once, in a technique that art historians would not rediscover in Western painting for 17,000 years. These Paleolithic artists understood perspective. Now they understood that the eye sees volume, not flat silhouette. And they painted it on these cave walls with a skill and a sensibility that is, without qualification, beautiful. No one knows exactly why the caves were painted. That is one of the great, beautiful mysteries of archaeology. The old theory that cave art was sympathetic hunting magic, painted to ensure success in the hunt, has gradually been replaced by far more complex interpretations. As many of the animals depicted in cave art were not the primary food sources of the people who made the art. Horses appear constantly, but horse bones are rare in the food debris of Magdalenian sites. Lions and rhinoceroses appear, but these were not hunted. Some researchers believe the deep caves were sacred spaces, visited for ritual or spiritual purposes. Their darkness and silence and sense of separation from the everyday world making them ideal places for ceremony, for vision, perhaps for communication with ancestors or spirits. Others suggest that the act of painting itself was what mattered, that making a mark in the deepest darkness, leaving a trace of your presence in a world that would otherwise swallow you without a sign, was a profound declaration of selfhood. I was here. I saw this. I made this. Remember me. There are handprints in the caves, you know, hundreds of them, at sites around the world. Some of them were made by pressing a hand against the wall and blowing pigment around it. A stencil that leaves a ghostly negative image, a silhouette of absence. Some were made by coating the hand in pigment and pressing it flat against the stone. These are among the most emotionally powerful objects in all of human prehistory. Because a handprint is the most direct, most immediate, most unmediated form of human expression that exists. No skill required, no mediation of symbol or language. Just a hand, pressed against the stone, saying with absolute clarity across 40,000 years of darkness, "This is me. I existed. I was here, and I was alive. And I reached out and touched this world. And I wanted you to know." And now, we're coming to the part of the story that in some ways I find most captivating of all. Because so far we have spoken about evolution and migration and art, the grand sweep of Paleolithic history. But now I want to get smaller. I want to zoom in. And I want to pull back the curtain on what life actually felt like, day to day, in the Paleolithic world. because the truth of how our ancestors lived is both harder and more beautiful than you might expect. Imagine waking up in a Paleolithic band roughly 30,000 years ago, somewhere in the grasslands of what is now Ukraine. The air inside your shelter, a structure built from mammoth bones and hides, surprisingly sturdy and wind-resistant, is warm from the coals of last night's fire. Around you, as the people you have spent your entire life with are stirring. Your band is perhaps 20 to 50 people in total. Extended family, the size of human social group that our brains evolved to manage perfectly. You know every face, every voice, every temperament. You know who is brave and who is cautious, who is generous and who holds back, who tells the best stories by the evening fire. These are not strangers. This is your world. Recent research has profoundly challenged the old image of the Stone Age as a life of constant misery and brutal struggle. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, peoples like the Kung-san of southern Africa or the Hadza of Tanzania, whose lifestyles most closely resemble those of our Paleolithic ancestors, have revealed something surprising. Hunter-gatherers typically work far fewer hours per day to meet their subsistence needs than people in agricultural or industrial societies. The original studies by anthropologist Marshall Salins suggested that hunter-gatherers worked perhaps 3 to 5 hours a day on subsistence activities and spent the rest of their time in rest, social interaction, play, and conversation. This was not the nasty, brutish, and short existence that philosophers once imagined. It was, in its own way, a life of remarkable leisure, purchased at the cost of physical hardship and uncertainty, yes, but a life in which work and play and social life were interwoven in ways that many people today find they long for, without quite knowing why. The diet of Paleolithic people was extraordinarily varied and, by modern nutritional standards, impressively balanced. They ate whatever was available, large game when it could be found, but also small animals, birds, eggs, fish in rivers and along coastlines, insects, grubs, honey when they could find it, tubers, roots, berries, nuts, seeds, leaves, and in fungi. Their intimate knowledge of the landscape they lived in was encyclopedic. They knew which plants were edible and which were poisonous, which tubers were richer after a fire, which nuts stored best and how to crack them. They knew the seasonal movements of game herds, the patterns of weather, the signs that told them where water could be found in dry times. This was not primitive knowledge. This was a vast, sophisticated, accumulated body of ecological intelligence. It passed down and refined over thousands of generations, tailored to the specific landscapes in which each band lived. Did you know that Paleolithic people were, on average, surprisingly healthy? Analysis of skeletal remains from the Upper Paleolithic suggests that many individuals were well-nourished, had excellent dental health, and lived lives of high physical fitness. The short stature often associated with prehistoric people is largely a myth when applied to anatomically modern humans of the Upper Paleolithic. Many Cro-Magnon individuals were as tall as modern Europeans. Diseases of civilization, the metabolic disorders, the inflammatory conditions associated with grain-heavy diets and sedentary lifestyles are largely absent from the Paleolithic skeletal record. The great killers in the Paleolithic world were trauma, infection from wounds, and particularly for women, the dangers of childbirth. But the survivors were not weak or sickly. They were, in many respects, magnificently robust. Now we come to the most mysterious, the most profound, and in some ways the most personal part of our journey. Because everything we have discussed so far, the tools, the art, the migrations, the fire, all of it rests on a foundation so fundamental, so deeply woven into what it means to be human, that we often forget it is there. Language. The word, the story. When did human beings first develop language? This is a question that may never be definitively answered, because language leaves no direct fossil record. Words dissolve into air. Sentences leave no bones behind. We can infer from anatomy, the size and structure of the vocal tract, the hypoglossal canal through which the nerve controlling the tongue passes, enter the FOXP2 gene, which is associated with language capability in modern humans and has been found in Neanderthals as well. But we cannot know with certainty when the first fully syntactic human sentence was spoken. Some researchers believe that a capacity for complex language emerged relatively recently, perhaps 50,000 to 100,000 years ago, coinciding with what some have called the Great Leap Forward, the explosion of symbolic behavior that marks the Upper Paleolithic. While others believe the roots of language stretch back much further, perhaps to Homo erectus, or even earlier, with complexity increasing gradually over hundreds of thousands of years. But let us imagine, for a moment, the emergence of story. Not just the cry that means danger, not just the grunt that means food, but the sentence that begins, "Once, long ago, there was a man who..." The moment when human beings first began to narrate, to take the raw events of experience and shape them into a sequence with a beginning, a middle, and an end, was the moment that everything changed. Because story is not just entertainment. Story is the technology by which information is stored and transmitted across generations in the absence of writing. A story about the time your grandfather's grandfather found water in a certain valley during a terrible drought is not just a story. It is a survival manual encoded in a form that the human brain is perfectly designed to receive and hold. The narrative form, with its characters, intentions, and resolutions, is the most efficient information delivery system that the human mind has ever devised. And the Paleolithic world ran on it. Well, think about what it means to tell a story around a fire in the dark. You are taking something that happened, something real, or something imagined, or some weaving of both, and you are making it present again through words and voice and expression. You are bringing the absent past into the living present. And the people listening to you are, in a very real neurological sense, experiencing what you describe. Our research in cognitive neuroscience has shown that listening to a vivid narrative activates the same brain regions as actually living the experiences described. The motor cortex fires at descriptions of physical action, the olfactory cortex at descriptions of smell. The emotional centers respond to characters' feelings as if they were real. Story is a kind of shared dream. And around Paleolithic fires, every night for tens of thousands of years, our ancestors dreamed together. This is, by the way, why this story you are hearing right now is affecting you at a level deeper than simple information transmission. You are not merely receiving facts about the Paleolithic era. You are, in some small way, re-experiencing it. The ancient storytelling circuits in your brain, the ones that evolved around fires just like the ones we have been imagining tonight, are doing exactly what they evolved to do. They are making you present in a world that existed long before you were born, and they are connecting you, through the magic of narrative, to the people who lived there. This is the oldest technology in the human world, and it still works. It works tonight, just as it worked then. Now imagine yourself at the coldest, harshest, most extreme moment in our species' recent history. The time is approximately 20,000 years ago, at the peak of the last glacial maximum. The ice sheets are at their greatest extent, covering all of Scandinavia, much of Britain, all of Canada and the northern United States, and vast regions of northern Asia. Sea levels are so low that land bridges connect Britain to Europe, Asia to Alaska, and many of the islands of Southeast Asia are joined into a single giant landmass. The climate is not just cold, it is dry. Much of the world's water is locked up in ice, and the remaining land is swept by ferocious dust storms that deposit thick layers of silt called loess across the landscape. It is, by any measure, on a brutal and demanding world. And yet, across this Ice Age world, human beings survive. Not just survive. In some respects, they thrive. The Gravettian people of Ice Age Europe hunt mammoth across the frigid plains of what is now Russia and Ukraine. Building their homes from mammoth bones and building their lives around these great animals who provide not just meat and fat for eating, but bone for tools, hide for clothing and shelter, sinew for binding, the fat for the oil lamps that keep the darkness at bay. On the steppes of Central Asia, hunter-gatherers follow reindeer herds across the tundra in seasonal migrations, their entire material culture light and portable and adapted to a nomadic life. In the warmer refugia of southern Europe, the Iberian Peninsula, the southern coastlines, populations concentrate and culture flourishes, producing the extraordinary art of Altamira and the tool traditions of the Solutrean. But the clothing that Paleolithic people wore during this period was more sophisticated than any romantic image of cave people in animal skins might suggest. Sewing needles made from bone and ivory have been found at sites across Ice Age Europe and Asia, dating back 40,000 years or more. These needles have eyes, tiny, precisely drilled holes through which thread was passed. You do not make a bone needle with an eye unless you are making fitted, a sewn clothing. Clothing designed to close snugly around the body and trap warm air inside. The Paleolithic people who survived the last glacial maximum were not wrapping themselves in unshaped animal hides. They were making garments. Tailored, layered, carefully constructed garments that served the same insulating functions as modern technical outdoor clothing. They understood insulation. They understood layering. They understood the danger of moisture and how to manage it. They were, in the realm of cold weather survival technology, genuinely expert. The social bonds that held these Ice Age communities together must have been, under such extreme conditions, exceptionally strong. In a world where a single bad hunting season, a single harsh winter, a single injury or illness could tip the balance between life and death, the web of obligation and reciprocity and mutual care that bound the group together was literally life-sustaining. While there is evidence from Paleolithic burial sites, some of them extraordinarily rich in grave goods, ochre, ornaments, and the clear signs of elaborate ceremony, that even in this brutal world, individuals were recognized and honored and mourned. At sites like Sungir in Russia, dated to roughly 34,000 years ago, the burials of two children have been found laid head to head, covered in thousands of tiny ivory beads that would have been sewn into their clothing, along with carved ivory figurines, mammoth ivory spears, and other objects representing an enormous investment of time and labor. These children were not just fed and sheltered. They were loved. They were celebrated. And when they died, they were mourned with a grief and a ceremony that speaks across 34,000 years in a language that any parent alive today would understand without a word of translation. And now we have arrived at the final chapter of the Old Stone Age, the beginning of a transition so profound that it would reshape the entire human world. The time is approximately 15,000 years ago. The last glacial maximum is ending. The ice sheets are retreating, slowly but with gathering momentum, releasing fresh water into the world's oceans, raising sea levels, transforming tundra into forest, dry steppe into grassland. The world is warming. And the world the Paleolithic people had known, the world of mammoth and woolly rhinoceros and cave bear, the world of vast open plains and bitter cold and the great herds of the Ice Age, is changing beyond recovery. The megafaunal extinctions of the late Pleistocene are one of the great mysteries and tragedies of natural history. Across the world, in the space of a few thousand years, straddling the end of the last ice age, a remarkable proportion of the world's large animals disappeared. The woolly mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, the cave lion, the giant ground sloth, the cave bear, the Irish elk with its enormous palmate antlers spanning 12 feet, all gone. In North America, the extinction was even more dramatic, with the disappearance of horses, camels, giant short-faced bears, mastodons, mammoths, and dozens of other species within a geological eye blink of the first human's arrival. Was this the result of climate change? Of the disruption of habitats as the ice retreated? Or was it, at least in part, the result of human hunting pressure? The overkill hypothesis that argues these animals, having evolved in a world without human hunters, had no fear of them and were devastatingly easy to kill. The truth is almost certainly a complex interaction of both factors. Climate change at the end of the Ice Age was real and rapid and devastating to many ecosystems. But the correlation between the arrival of modern humans in new continents, North America, Australia, as Madagascar, the Pacific Islands, and the subsequent extinction of large native animals is too consistent to dismiss. Our ancestors, following the imperative of survival, hunting with skill and coordination, and the devastating efficiency of human social cooperation, likely played a significant role in reshaping the fauna of the world. This is not a comfortable thought. It suggests that the human impact on the natural world did not begin with industrialization or even agriculture. It began at the very dawn of our species spread across the earth. We have always been a force of transformation. The question has always been whether we could transform the world sustainably, or whether our success would consume the very resources it depended on. And yet, even as the world of the old Stone Age was ending, yet the human spirit that had animated it was reaching its most extraordinary expression. The art of the late Paleolithic, the paintings of Lascaux, the carvings of La Madeleine, the extraordinary portable art of the Gravettian, represents a zenith of Paleolithic creativity that has never been surpassed in its directness, its vitality, its profound connection to the natural world. These were people who knew animals with an intimacy that most modern humans can barely imagine, who had watched horses and bison and deer for thousands of hours, who understood their movements and their expressions and their seasons with a completeness born of lives spent in deep, daily relationship with the non-human world. And this knowledge, this love, poured out onto cave walls and into carved bone and ivory in images of such power that they stop us 40,000 years later, us still in our tracks. We are nearing the end of our journey now. We have traveled so far together, from the first footprints in volcanic ash to the painted caves, from the first stone tool to the bone needle, from the first campfire to the great Ice Age migrations that carried our ancestors to every corner of the earth. And now, I want to pause here, in the closing moments of the old Stone Age, and look back at everything we have seen, because there is a pattern in it. Something that runs like a thread through every chapter of this story. And I want you to see it before we say goodbye. The pattern is this. Again and again, in every chapter of the Paleolithic story, we see human beings responding to challenge with creativity. When the forests retreated and the savannas expanded, our ancestors stood up, and in standing up, freed their hands, which allowed tools, which allowed cooking, which allowed the brain to grow. When the world grew cold and dark and dangerous, they made fire. And around the fire, they made community, which allowed language, which allowed story, which allowed the transmission of knowledge across time. When the great herds moved and the seasons shifted and the landscape changed, they moved too, across continents, across oceans, across mountain ranges and frozen wastes. carrying with them not just tools and food, but art and music and ceremony, and all the invisible technologies of culture that made them not just survivors, but human beings in the fullest sense. The story of the old Stone Age is not a story of primitive beings struggling towards something better. It is a story of fully realized human beings, as intelligent and as feeling and as creative as any who have lived since, yet meeting the world as it was and making something beautiful of it. There is a moment, and I think about this often. There is a moment in the Chauvet Cave in France, which contains some of the oldest cave paintings in the world at roughly 36,000 years old, where a single artist, long ago, left the impression of a hand with a crooked little finger. This person had a healed injury that bent their little finger permanently. And across the cave, yes, there are multiple handprints with that same distinctive crooked finger. The same person made all of them, came back over and over to this deep, sacred, fire-lit chamber, and pressed that distinctive hand against the stone again and again. A signature across 36,000 years. An identity. A person who wanted, in some deep and wordless way, to be known, to be remembered. And they are. We know them. We cannot name them. But we know that crooked finger, and we know the hand it belonged to. And we know that this person was here, in this cave, making something that mattered to them with a passion that the weight of millennia has not diminished by a single grain. That is the Stone Age. Not a time of brutish darkness, but a time of extraordinary humanity. A time of courage and creativity and love and loss, of art made in firelight and children buried with ceremonies of grief and tenderness, and of people who walked the whole world over just to see what was on the other side of the horizon. They were us. We are them. And the distance between us is, in the long view of time, nothing at all. And so, our magnificent journey through the old Stone Age comes gently to a close. We have traveled together across 3 million years of human prehistory, from the first tentative footprints in volcanic ash to the painted caves that still take the breath away. From the first stone struck against stone in the African dawn, to the last mammoth hunt on the frozen plains of Ice Age Europe. We began with creatures who were barely human, and we ended with human beings so fully realized, so richly alive in their art and their ceremony and their love for one another, that the so-called primitive label falls away like ash. We have watched a species be born, be tested by ice and drought and extinction, and then emerge from every trial, not just intact but transformed, deeper, richer, more fully itself. What a journey it has been. What an extraordinary, humbling, magnificent journey. I want you to know something. Researching and writing and sharing this story with you tonight has moved me in ways I did not entirely expect. There is something about the old Stone Age, something about its silence and its vastness and the way human creativity shines out of it like firelight in darkness. That always gets to me. Every time I look at an image of those cave paintings, every time I read about those Sungir children buried with their thousands of ivory beads, every time I think about that crooked finger pressed against the wall of Chauvet, I feel something that I can only describe as recognition. Yet not just historical recognition, but something deeper. Something in the blood. These are our people. This is our story. And without you, my dear listener, there would be no one to tell it to. What this long and beautiful story teaches us, I think, is something quietly profound. It teaches us that human beings have always been problem solvers. But more than that, they have always been meaning makers. That the drive to create art, to tell stories, to bury the dead with ceremony, yet to reach out a hand and leave a mark in the stone that says, I was here. that this is not a luxury, not an add-on to the serious business of survival, but perhaps the most essential thing about us. The caves were not painted because it was easy or safe or practical. They were painted because something deep in the human spirit demands that life be more than mere continuation. It demands beauty. It demands meaning. It demands that we look at the world around us and say, I see this, and it matters. Oh, and I want to make something of it. That impulse, 300,000 years old, is alive in you tonight. It is alive every time you notice beauty, every time you feel wonder, every time you reach out to connect with another human being across the silence. If this journey tonight moved you in any way, if these ancient stories settled into you and made you feel something like wonder, something like connection, something like a quiet, a deep gratitude for this improbable and beautiful life, then please subscribe. One tap, and every night a new story opens up for you. Because this channel is built on exactly this belief, that great stories, told well, can make us feel more human. Every day we bring you a new narrative, from the ancient world, from the dawn of civilization, from the forgotten corners of history, from the deep time of prehistory. Stories that are long and unhurried and allow you to truly sink in stories for the hours between waking and sleeping, when the mind is most open and the heart most ready to travel. We have built a community of listeners and dreamers and history lovers here. And every single one of them found this place the same way you did, by stumbling into a story and staying. So stay, subscribe, come back tomorrow night and the night after that. Now, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to hear your answer. Please write in the comments below. Which moment from the old Stone Age that we visited tonight affected you most deeply? Was it the Laetoli footprints? Those ancient, achingly familiar tracks in the volcanic ash? Was it the painted horses of Lascaux galloping through the firelight across 17,000 years? Was it the handprint with the crooked finger pressed again and again against the cold stone of Chauvet? Or was it the children of Sungir, buried with their thousands of ivory beads by people who loved them and could not let them go without ceremony? Tell me in the comments, because your answers genuinely shape what I create next. The next script on this channel will be influenced by what you say tonight, what moves you, what questions you are left with. Your comments are not just feedback, they are part of the creative process. And I will tell you something else. In the next video, I am going to take you somewhere that picks up exactly where tonight's story ends. To the dawn of the Neolithic. To the moment when human beings first planted a seed in the ground and waited for it to grow. And in doing so, changed the trajectory of the entire human world forever. It is a story of revolution. Not the kind fought with weapons, but the kind that happens quietly, in fields and river valleys, one season at a time. And it contains a surprise that most people have never heard. A truth about the first farmers that will make you see the agricultural revolution in a completely different light. Curious? You should be. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. This channel is something I am very proud of, and it is something we have built together, all of us, every listener, every commenter, every person who has shared a video or recommended the channel to a friend who needed a good story to fall asleep to. I read every comment, every single one. I know your names, your recurring questions, your favorite periods of history. This community is real, and it is warm, and it is something I cherish. Thank you for being part of it. And now, my dear friend, it is time to rest. I do not know what hour it is where you are in the world. Perhaps it is deep night, and you are already half asleep. This story dissolving into dream at the edges. Perhaps it is early morning and you are still, and the world outside is just beginning to wake. Perhaps the light is growing gray at your window, or the room around you is dark and quiet and perfectly still. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, you have done something tonight that our ancestors did for hundreds of thousands of years. You have sat still in the dark and let a story carry you somewhere else. You have used the oldest technology the human mind possesses. You have been, tonight, and not exactly what you have always been. A member of the most extraordinary, most creative, most endlessly surprising species this planet has ever produced. Let the story settle in you now. Let the painted horses run quietly through your dreams. Let the firelight flicker behind your closed eyes. Let those ancient footprints, those small, upright, achingly familiar footprints in the hardened ash, let them walk you gently down into sleep. Good night to all of you. Sweet dreams, beautiful visions. And until we meet again in another story, on another night, in another epic. Take care. God bless you all.